In a charming home draped in soft pink, a widowed CEO tries to throw a memorable birthday for his paralyzed daughter, but not a single guest shows up. Just as the silence becomes unbearable, a young black boy knocks on the door, asking to join. Moved by the boy's kindness, the CEO decides to visit his home, and what happens next will change the boy's life forever. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. Marcus Johnson stood at the threshold between the marble-tiled hallway and the vast expanse of the living room, his broad shoulders filling the frame of the doorway. Outside, the pale winter sun dipped low over Lakeshore, its reflection glimmering on the still waters beyond the manicured lawn. Inside, pink and silver balloons trembled against the high cathedral ceiling, with each faint stir of the heating system, their thin ribbons trailing like sighs. A princess castle cake, 3 tiers high with intricate sugar turrets, sat untouched on a long walnut table polished to a mirror sheen. Soft children's music drifted from a Bluetooth speaker, cheerful in tone but hollow in this cavernous room. This was the first birthday party since the accident, 2 years of silence, grief and awkward half-visits from people who never stayed long. Marcus's gaze moved to the bay window, where his daughter, Aaliyah, sat in her wheelchair, her small hands resting lightly on the wheels. She wore a pale lavender dress that made her skin glow warm against the sunlight spilling through the glass. At 8 years old she had her mother's eyes, big, searching, hopeful, and her mother's way of holding in questions she feared might hurt the answers. "Daddy," she called, turning her head slightly without taking her eyes off the driveway, "when are my friends coming?" The question cut deeper than she knew. Marcus had sent 20 invitations, hand-delivered with personal notes to parents he once considered close. Every single one had been answered with a polite refusal. Family commitment. Soccer game. We'll be out of town. He had read each with the detached calm of a man trained to handle bad news, but deep down he recognized the truth. They were avoiding the sight of his daughter in that chair. Avoiding the reminder of how life can change in an instant. "They're probably just running late, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile as he adjusted the knot of his dark silk tie. Even in the privacy of his own home, Marcus wore the armor of presentation. His voice was steady, but inside there was a tightening, a slow coil of helpless anger at the world that had taken his wife, broken his daughter, and turned friends into strangers. Aaliyah didn't respond right away. She kept looking out at the empty circular drive, the clean sweep of asphalt between the stone gateposts, as if willing a car to appear. Behind her, a part-time party coordinator, hired more for show than necessity, moved from table to table, straightening cups that no one would drink from and smoothing tablecloths that would never be wrinkled. Marcus stepped closer to his daughter, lowering his voice. "We'll still have cake, and I've got that movie you love. We'll make it special, just us." She glanced up at him, her smile small and polite, the way a child smiles when she doesn't want to make her parent feel worse. That smile hurt more than any tear could. The sound came then, light, rapid knocks at the front door. Not the firm rap of an adult, but the tentative, hopeful tapping of small hands. Marcus straightened instantly, his heart lifting. Maybe, just maybe, someone had come after all. He strode across the foyer, past the grand staircase that wound upward like a question mark, and pulled open one of the double doors. A boy stood on the broad stone porch, framed by the cold air. He was small, wiry, his dark brown skin catching the slant of the afternoon light. His jeans were faded and frayed at the knees, his sneakers scuffed from long use. A red, white and blue Captain America t-shirt stretched slightly over his narrow chest, a small hole near the hem. His hair was neatly combed, though a little too long at the sides, and his wide-set eyes held both caution and excitement. "Hi," the boy said, his voice polite but carrying an edge of breathlessness from the walk up the long driveway. "I heard there's a birthday party here." Marcus hesitated, taking in the scene, the contrast between this child and the polished perfection behind him. "There is," he said finally. "But, I live down by Maple Court," the boy went on quickly, gesturing vaguely over his shoulder toward the slope of land that led away from the lakefront mansions to the modest cluster of apartment buildings. "I was going to the store for my grandma, and I've seen her before." The girl in the window, Marcus's brow furrowed. "You've seen my daughter," the boy nodded earnestly. Sometimes I walk by here, and I see her sitting there, looking out. She looked kind of sad, like she was waiting for something. Today at the store, some people were talking about a birthday at the big house by the lake. I thought maybe it was hers. I don't have an invitation, but I was hoping I could say happy birthday, maybe be her friend for a little while. Marcus felt a strange shift inside, the tension in his chest loosening in surprise. He studied the boy's face for any trace of mockery or mischief, found none, only sincerity. From the living room came Aaliyah's voice, curious and brighter than it had been all day. "Daddy, is that someone for me?" Marcus looked back toward the bay window. Aaliyah had wheeled herself forward a few inches, craning to see past him. Her eyes lit up when she caught sight of the boy. "Hi, are you here for my party?" The boy stepped forward, smiling shyly but with a spark of enthusiasm. "If it's okay, I'm Jaden Carter." Marcus glanced between his daughter, her eager smile breaking through the polite reserve, and this boy from the other side of town, who had walked up here simply because he didn't want a girl he didn't know to be alone on her birthday. There was no good reason to say no. "Come in, Jaden," Marcus said at last, stepping aside. The boy's eyes widened as he crossed the threshold, taking in the grand foyer, the sweeping staircase, the soft gleam of chandeliers overhead. But almost instantly, his attention shifted to Aaliyah, who sat waiting in the living room, her hands clasped together, beaming. Marcus closed the door behind them, the sound of the latch clicking somehow final, as though marking the start of something he couldn't yet name. He didn't know it yet, but in that moment, between the boy's hesitant knock and his daughter's bright welcoming smile, an invisible bridge had been built. One that would soon carry all three of them into places neither wealth nor solitude could ever reach. Jaden stepped into the living room with the unself-conscious curiosity of a child who had nothing to prove. His eyes moved over the bright balloons, the untouched cake, the neatly arranged plates and napkins, but there was no trace of the hesitation Marcus had seen so many other children show around his daughter's wheelchair. He looked straight at Aaliyah, his smile growing wide as though the two of them had been waiting for this moment for years. Aaliyah adjusted herself in the chair, brushing a stray curl from her forehead, and said with the kind of excitement Marcus hadn't heard in far too long, "Do you like superheroes?" Jaden's eyes lit up, and without glancing at Marcus for permission, he walked right over, until he was close enough to see the purple sheen of her dress and the little satin bow clipped in her hair. "I love superheroes," he said. "And I think your wheels here would make the perfect rescue vehicle." Aaliyah tilted her head, puzzled, but intrigued. "What do you mean?" Jaden crouched down so that they were at eye level. He spread his hands wide, painting the scene in the air. "Well, Captain America, that's me, just found a partner who has the fastest flying rescue chariot in the city. And that's you. We've got to save the princess trapped at the top of the tallest tower before the clock strikes." His voice carried a conviction so pure that for a second Marcus almost believed they were about to charge into a real mission. Aaliyah laughed softly, not the polite laugh she'd used earlier with Marcus, but a sound that hinted at something breaking open. She tapped one of the rims of her chair. "You mean this is going to fly?" "Not just fly," Jaden said, "but zoom over rooftops, dodge dragons, and land right on the castle balcony." Marcus stood at the edge of the room watching them. He noticed how Jaden didn't glance down at the chair in pity or skirt around it with careful avoidance. He treated it as part of the adventure, a tool, not a limitation. Something inside Marcus shifted. He had spent 2 years carefully managing Aaliyah's world so she wouldn't feel less than, and here was this boy transforming her reality in seconds with nothing but imagination. Jaden straightened up. "First though, superheroes need cake. You can't save the day on an empty stomach." He moved to the table and looked at the towering princess cake with a whistle of admiration. "That's the biggest castle cake I've ever seen." Aaliyah wheeled herself closer, her hands moving with ease over the polished floor, and Marcus caught himself smiling as he realized she was leading the way for once. The party coordinator sliced generous pieces, setting them down on plates with delicate forks, but Jaden didn't wait for formality. He dug in with the same gusto he had brought into the room, his eyes widening after the first bite. "This is amazing, your chef must be royal." Aaliyah giggled, and the sound was so full and unguarded that Marcus felt it in his chest. It wasn't the hesitant smile of earlier, it was a burst of joy, clear and unself-conscious. They ate and talked, Jaden weaving small adventures into every exchange. A fork became a sword to fend off invisible thieves. A napkin was a secret map to hidden treasure under the couch cushions. He leaned closer at one point and said, "My grandma always tells me, a real superhero is someone who makes other people feel stronger than they think they are." Aaliyah's eyes lingered on him for a beat, and Marcus could see she was tucking those words away somewhere deep. When the cake was gone, Jaden announced it was time to launch the rescue mission. He took hold of the back of Aaliyah's chair and asked, "Captain, are you ready?" She straightened in her seat and nodded solemnly. "Let's go." They moved around the room, Jaden narrating the obstacles: lava pits near the fireplace, storm clouds over the coffee table, a sleeping giant sprawled across the rug. Aaliyah joined in, giving orders, telling him which way to turn, when to speed up, when to hide. The two of them laughed in bursts that filled the space more warmly than any decoration could. Marcus found himself stepping forward, drawn in despite himself. "Looks like you two might need backup," he said. Jaden glanced over his shoulder with a grin. "Sure, you can be the wise old mentor who tells us where the bad guys are." Marcus chuckled, the title oddly fitting. He joined them, pointing out enemy spies in the hallway and warning of booby traps near the dining room chairs. For the first time in a long while, Marcus wasn't thinking about his to-do list, his phone, or the silence of the house. He was inside their story. The rescue ended with Aaliyah declaring victory from the balcony, which was really the space near the bay window where she had spent so many hours alone. Now, she sat there flushed and grinning, her chest rising and falling with quick breaths, her eyes bright in a way Marcus had missed more than he could say. They wound down slowly, Jaden's voice lowering as the adventure faded back into the quiet of the late afternoon. He set his hands lightly on the back of her chair. "I should probably get home, my grandma worries if I'm late." Aaliyah's smile dimmed a little. "Will you come back?" He looked at her, and for a second Marcus thought he saw the same understanding adults rarely have, that this wasn't just about a playdate, but about showing up when it mattered. "If it's okay with your dad, I'd like to," Jaden said. Marcus met the boy's gaze and nodded. "You're welcome here any time." As Jaden moved toward the front door, Aaliyah called after him, her voice carrying that new brightness. "Thank you for coming." Jaden turned back, smiling wide enough to show the small gap where a tooth had once been. "This is the best birthday party I've ever been to, even if it's not mine." Marcus stood there, watching his daughter's eyes follow Jaden until he disappeared down the driveway. He felt an ache, but this time it wasn't the familiar weight of loss. It was the sudden humbling knowledge that sometimes the best gifts came wrapped not in ribbon or paper, but in the form of an unexpected knock on the door. The following Saturday, Marcus steered his dark sedan off the familiar main road that curved along the lake and followed the narrower streets down into the working-class section of Lakeshore. He had driven past Maple Court before without really seeing it, the way people in his world often skimmed over places that didn't figure into their own routines. Today, with Aaliyah in the passenger seat beside him, and a store-bought pie in a paper bag on the back seat, he paid attention. The small apartment buildings stood in neat rows, their brick walls weathered but intact, their windows lined with potted plants and lace curtains. Children's bicycles leaned against the railings, and chalk drawings brightened the walkways. Someone's laundry flapped on a line strung between balconies, and the air carried the faint, comforting scent of something baking. He parked in a visitor space, cut the engine, and glanced at his daughter. "Ready?" She smiled in that understated way of hers, a hint of anticipation in her eyes. Marcus carried the pie as he guided her wheelchair toward the entrance of Building C, noting the careful sweep of the sidewalk and the patches of flowers planted in half-barrel planters. Aaliyah pressed the buzzer marked Carter, and within moments the door opened to reveal Jaden, grinning as if he had been watching the clock all morning. Come in," he said, holding the door wide with a flourish. The hallway inside was narrow, the carpet a little worn but freshly vacuumed. Marcus followed Jaden down to the second door on the right. When it opened, he found himself looking into a small living room that was instantly warm, not from expensive lighting or decor, but from the lived-in sense of belonging. A beige sofa with a crocheted throw occupied one wall, and the opposite wall was almost entirely covered with framed photographs, graduations, weddings, babies held in proud arms, children in Halloween costumes. The scent of cinnamon and sugar was stronger here, mingling with the faint aroma of fresh coffee. Evelyn Carter stepped forward from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was a small woman in her late 60s, her dark skin smooth for her age, her hair gathered neatly into a bun streaked with silver. She wore a simple navy dress and sturdy shoes, but carried herself with a quiet dignity that filled the room. "Mr. Johnson," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Welcome to our home." Marcus took her hand, noting the firm, confident grip. "Thank you for having us. And please call me Marcus." He held up the pie. "I brought this, but I suspect whatever's in the oven smells better." Evelyn smiled, her eyes bright with humor. "It's just an apple cobbler, but we'll make room for both." A man entered from the hallway, tall, broad-shouldered, with calloused hands and a tired but friendly face. "This is my son Andre," Evelyn said. "He works as an electrician. And my daughter-in-law, Keisha, will be out in a moment. She's just finishing a shift at the clinic." Andre shook Marcus's hand firmly. "Jaden talks about your daughter all the time. He says she's the best teammate he's ever had." Marcus glanced over to where Jaden was already leaning down to talk to Aaliyah, his voice low and animated. She was listening intently, the corners of her mouth lifting into a smile. Evelyn motioned toward the sofa. "Please sit down. Can I get you some coffee?" As Marcus settled in, he let his eyes travel over the details: the well-worn books on a small shelf, the jar of homemade cookies on the counter, the old but well-polished dining table in the corner. There was no extra space here, no sprawling views of a lake, but every inch was cared for. When Evelyn returned with steaming mugs, she sat across from Marcus and regarded him with an appraising gentleness. "Jaden tells me you've had some hard years. We all have in our own ways. When you see someone carrying a heavy load," she said, setting her cup down with a soft clink, "you share the weight, not because they are weak, but because everyone needs to be reminded they are not alone." The words landed with a quiet force. Marcus thought of the long months after the accident, when he had locked himself into routines and let the world narrow to just him and Aaliyah. He thought of the empty chairs at her birthday party. He nodded slowly, feeling the truth of what she said. From the corner he heard a burst of laughter. He turned to see Jaden and Aaliyah in the far end of the living room where two low bookshelves formed a small nook. Jaden had draped a blanket over the top to make a roof, and inside the floor was lined with pillows. A stack of books lay beside them, and Aaliyah held one open on her lap. "What's going on over there?" Marcus called. "It's the adventure library," Jaden replied. "Only the bravest explorers can enter. Each book is a map to another world, but you have to guess which one from the clues." Aaliyah laughed again, the sound carrying across the room like sunlight. "He made me the head librarian," she said. "I get to decide who can check out the maps." Marcus stood, walking over to them. "May I join?" he asked. Jaden considered him gravely. "Only if you promise to return all books on time and never fold the corners of the pages." "I can manage that," Marcus said, smiling. He crouched down to peer into the blanket-covered space. Inside it was a child's dream, soft, enclosed, and full of possibility. Aaliyah held out a book, her eyes sparkling. "This one takes us to a city made of glass," she said. "But you have to walk carefully or the streets will crack." Jaden leaned in to whisper to her, and they both stifled giggles before announcing the next library rule to Marcus: "No talking about the outside world once you're inside." Marcus stayed there with them for a while, letting himself be drawn into the game. He realized that in this tiny corner of a modest apartment, surrounded by two children's laughter and imagination, there was more life than in all the polished, silent rooms of his own house. The adventure library wasn't just a game, it was a world where Aaliyah wasn't limited by what she could or couldn't do. She was in charge, creating rules, leading the way. And Jaden, without fanfare, was making sure she could. As the afternoon light softened and the smell of apple cobbler drifted in from the kitchen, Marcus glanced back at Evelyn. She was watching them with a knowing expression, her hands folded in her lap. He thought again of what she had said about sharing the weight, and understood she wasn't just talking about hardship, she was talking about joy too. That, he realized, was something he and Aaliyah had been missing. He didn't know yet how much this visit would change the course of their lives, but as he watched his daughter laugh inside the blanket fort with her new friend, Marcus knew this was the beginning of something they both needed more than they had ever realized. The call came just after 8 in the evening, when Marcus was going over a report in his home office. The voice on the other end was his daughter's, trembling and rushed. "Daddy, it's Jaden, he called me." Grandma Evelyn fell down in the kitchen and wouldn't wake up. "They took her to St. Mary's," said. The paper in Marcus's hand slid onto the desk. He was already standing, reaching for his coat. "I'm on my way, stay by the phone in case I need to call you." The drive into town felt longer than usual, each stoplight a deliberate test of his patience. The glass towers of downtown gave way to the low brick sprawl near the hospital, the kind of place he knew only from charity events and ribbon cuttings. When he pushed through the automatic doors of St. Mary's emergency entrance, the sterile scent of disinfectant and the distant beeping of monitors washed over him. He spotted Jaden almost immediately, sitting in a molded plastic chair far too big for him, his knees drawn up, fingers twisted together so tightly the knuckles had gone white. His Captain America t-shirt was wrinkled and his sneakers tapped an anxious rhythm against the tile floor. When he looked up and saw Marcus, he stood quickly. "They won't let me in right now. She's still with the doctors." Marcus lowered himself into the chair beside him. "Tell me what happened." Jaden took a shaky breath. "We were eating dinner. She got up to get more cornbread, and then she just dropped the plate and fell. I called my dad, and he called the ambulance. They said it's her heart. They said it's really bad." His voice cracked on the last word. A nurse walked by, and Jaden turned toward Marcus as if remembering something urgent. "The doctor told my dad she needs this medicine. Cardiotrex. It's supposed to help her heart get stronger, but he also said it costs more than our insurance will cover." The name landed like a weight in Marcus's chest. Cardiotrex was one of Harbormen's most advanced drugs, a flagship in their cardiac line, developed over nearly a decade of research and trials. He had been in the boardroom when they approved its pricing structure high enough to recoup costs and satisfy shareholders, though he had known even then it would be out of reach for many working families. He forced his voice to stay even. "Did they say how soon she would need it?" "Right away," Jaden said. "They're trying to figure out if there's something else they can give her, but the doctor said it wouldn't work as well. He told my dad. He told him she might not have much time if they don't get the right medicine." Jaden's eyes brimmed and he wiped at them quickly with the back of his hand as if embarrassed. Marcus leaned back, feeling the cold press of the chair against his shoulders. He could see Evelyn's face in his mind, her steady eyes, her calm voice telling him that everyone needed to be reminded they were not alone. And now, in this bright sterile hallway, she was the one carrying the weight, and the only thing between her and survival was a price tag attached to a bottle with his company's name on it. He stood. "Stay here, Jaden. I'm going to find the doctor." The cardiologist on duty, a tall man with a salt and pepper beard, was reviewing charts at the nurse's station. Marcus introduced himself and asked directly, "What is her condition?" "Mrs. Carter has advanced heart failure," the doctor said, glancing at the chart. "She's a good candidate for Cardiotrex. Frankly, it's her best option, but her insurance only covers part of the cost. Without supplemental coverage or significant out-of-pocket payment, we'll have to look at older treatments. They're less effective and have more side effects, but they're affordable." Marcus felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. Affordable to whom? The doctor gave a practiced sigh. Affordable to the people sitting in our waiting rooms most days. But in her case, the difference in effectiveness could mean the difference between months and years or days. The hum of fluorescent lights seemed louder now, the air heavier. Marcus thought of the quarterly reports, the polished presentations about value optimization, the proud announcements of record profits. He thought of the living room at Maple Court, the smell of apple cobbler, the adventure library where Aaliyah had laughed without holding back. He thought of Jaden's face when he had said his grandma made people feel stronger. He turned back toward the waiting area. Jaden was still in the same chair, his elbows on his knees staring at the floor. When Marcus approached, the boy looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're not going to give her the good medicine, are they?" Marcus lowered himself into the chair beside him again. He didn't want to lie, but he wasn't ready to tell the whole truth. They're trying to figure out the best plan, he said carefully. Jaden pressed his lips together, nodding slowly, but his eyes gave away the fear behind the motion. She's always been the strong one, he said. Even when Grandpa died, even when my dad lost his job for a while, she just kept us going. She says the heart is the bravest part of the body. I don't know what we'll do if hers gives up. Marcus looked at him and felt the weight of a truth he could no longer sidestep. Evelyn Carter might die, not because there was no cure, not because science hadn't found the answer, but because the answer had been placed behind a wall of profit margins and market forecasts, walls he had helped build. He exhaled slowly, the decision forming in his mind even before he could name it. Somewhere down the hall, machines beeped steadily, and the muted voices of nurses moved from room to room. In this moment though, all Marcus could hear was the echo of Evelyn's words: share the weight, not because they are weak, but because everyone needs to be reminded they are not alone. And now it was his turn to carry her part of the load. Marcus stood outside Evelyn Carter's hospital room, the muted light from the overhead fixtures spilling into the hallway. He could see her through the narrow glass panel in the door, propped up against a stack of pillows, her skin pale but her eyes still carrying that steady watchfulness he had seen at Maple Court. The beeping of the heart monitor was slow and even, each tone a reminder of time passing, time that might run out if something didn't change. He stepped inside quietly, not wanting to disturb her, but her gaze found him immediately. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly, her voice thinner than he remembered, "you didn't have to come here." Marcus pulled a chair closer to her bed, lowering himself into it so they were at eye level. "Yes, I did. Jaden told me what happened." She smiled faintly. "That boy worries too much. I'm tougher than I look." Her attempt at levity couldn't disguise the fatigue in her face. Andre was sitting in the corner, his broad shoulders hunched forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He looked up, the exhaustion in his eyes giving way to a trace of relief. "They say she needs that medicine, cardiotrex. You probably know it." Marcus nodded slowly. "I know it very well." He hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the admission. "It's one of ours. Harbor Med developed it." Andre exhaled sharply, leaning back against the wall. "Then you know why they're telling us the insurance won't cover enough of it. They gave me a number I can't even say out loud without choking. They're talking about cheaper drugs, but the doctor was clear. Those won't do the same job." Evelyn's hand moved slightly against the blanket, and Marcus reached out to cover it with his own. "I'm not going to let you go without what you need," he said. "You will get the full course of cardiotrex, starting tonight, and you will not pay a single cent for it. I'll make sure of it." Andre blinked, taken aback. "You'd do that, just like that?" Marcus met his gaze. "This isn't charity, this is the right thing to do. Your mother has done more for my daughter in the past few weeks than I could ever put into words. I'm in a position to help, so I will." Evelyn's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "You know, I've spent my life telling my students and my family that strength isn't just about what you can carry. It's about knowing when to let someone else carry it with you. I guess it's my turn." As the evening wore on, the first dose of cardiotrex arrived, administered with quiet efficiency by the nurse. Marcus stayed until he was certain Evelyn was resting comfortably, her breathing even, the lines of strain easing from her face. When he finally stepped out into the cool night air of the hospital parking lot, he felt the deep, steady satisfaction of having done exactly what needed to be done. It wasn't triumph, not in the way his business victories had felt. It was something more grounded, more human. It was knowing that tonight, a life had been pulled back from the edge, not by a miracle, but by a choice. And for the first time in a long while, that choice made him feel whole. 20 years had passed since that night at St. Mary's, and the quiet lakeside town of Lakeshore had grown in ways Marcus could not have imagined. The old brick warehouses near the harbor were now glass-fronted community spaces. The skyline had shifted, but the water still caught the evening light the same way it always had. Marcus, now in his mid-60s, stepped out of a sleek black sedan in front of the brand-new Lakeshore Community Cardiac Center. The glass doors reflected the flutter of banners in the autumn breeze, each one bearing the logo of the Harbor Med Foundation, a name that had come to mean hope for thousands. Inside, the lobby hummed with voices and warm greetings. Physicians in white coats mingled with families whose children darted between them, clutching small paper flags with the center's emblem. At the front of the hall, a broad stage was framed by deep blue drapes and a banner that read "Opening Hearts, Opening Doors." Marcus took his place in the front row, lowering himself into the cushioned seat with the ease of someone who no longer had to carry the weight of a corporate empire. Beside him, Aaliyah sat tall in her custom wheelchair, a confident woman in her late 20s, her hair gathered in an elegant twist. She wore a navy dress that matched the banners, and the lanyard around her neck identified her as creative lead, therapeutic game design. She caught Marcus's eye, and smiled, that same spark she'd had at 8 years old still shining through. The crowd hushed as a tall figure in a tailored gray suit stepped up to the podium. Jaden Carter, now 28, looked out over the audience with the composed confidence of a man who had fought hard for his place in the world. His white coat was draped over one arm, and the other hand rested easily on the podium as he began. "When I was 8 years old, I walked up to a big house on the lake," he said, his voice carrying easily to the farthest corner of the hall. "I didn't have an invitation, I didn't have fancy clothes. I just saw a little girl in the window who looked like she could use a friend, and I wanted to make her smile on her birthday." A soft ripple of laughter and murmurs moved through the crowd. Marcus felt Aaliyah's hand brush his, a silent acknowledgement that she remembered every detail of that day. Jaden continued, his voice deepening with emotion. "I had no idea that knock on the door would change not just her life, but mine, and maybe even the course of this whole community. My grandmother, Evelyn Carter, used to tell me, when you plant a seed with love, the flower will feed the world." At 8 years old, I didn't understand it. Now standing here as a doctor and researcher, I do. The medicine we create, the care we give, the people we fight for, they're all seeds. And today, this center is one of those flowers. He gestured to the bright sunlit wings of the new facility, where volunteers and staff in teal shirts stood ready to guide families through. "We built this place for the people who are too often left behind, families who work hard but still can't afford the care they need. Thanks to the Harbor Med Foundation, we can offer treatment that heals the heart without breaking the bank. This is for every child who deserves a future, and every grandparent who deserves more time." The applause was warm and sustained, echoing against the high ceiling. Marcus let it wash over him, his gaze fixed on the young man at the podium. He saw the boy from Maple Court, the one who had turned his daughter's wheelchair into a rescue chariot, now leading an army of healers with the same imagination and resolve. When the speeches ended, and the ribbon was cut, the crowd began to flow into the new center. Marcus stayed seated for a moment, taking in the sight of Aaliyah chatting with a group of young designers, their laughter ringing clear. She had built her career creating therapeutic games for children with mobility challenges, often partnering with Jaden's research team to integrate them into recovery programs. Marcus's eyes softened as he looked around the bustling lobby, the walls alive with murals painted by local artists, the air filled with the sounds of children playing in a dedicated space off to one side. He felt the kind of satisfaction that came not from balance sheets or shareholder meetings, but from knowing he had been there at the start of something that mattered. As the camera from the local news crew panned across the room, it caught Marcus sitting in the front row, Aaliyah at his side, both of them smiling as Jaden greeted patients in the reception area. The lens pulled back, moving past the polished floors and wide hallways, past the glass doors and out into the crisp autumn air. Through the windows, children's laughter spilled out onto the sidewalk, bright and unrestrained. And as the scene widened, the building stood like a beacon on the edge of Lakeshore, its name gleaming in the sun. A voiceover from the anchor would later say, "Sometimes, changing the world starts with just one act of kindness." But in Marcus's heart, the words were simpler, truer, and belonged to all of them. Sometimes, changing the whole world begins with a single knock on the door. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.